Space Cave. It's just a name that you thought of, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know why I landed on that. I like the idea of just escapism. I think I talked about it in the beginning of the show a little bit as far as like why I came up with that name. I think when people are in cubicles and or wherever they're working, even if you're in your home where you might have a picture of a place you think about, a beach, the mountains, an open oasis somewhere, whatever it is, maybe you just really envision going and sailing around the world. And we live all these lives like that, where we escape somewhere and we picture ourselves on the boat as the sun's coming up and the water's, maybe in our imagination that day it's really flat and easy to sail. And maybe the other day there are big squalls and you have to really think on your feet and solve problems. And then you realize you're creating all of that in your mind just as a way to disappear for a moment from where you are. And so I liked the idea of a little safe space, like an enclosed space out away from everything that we know. So I think that's where Space Cave came from.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to an episode of The Box Cutter, where we take apart an episode of Disney's Out of the Box and see if it still holds up. My name is Daniel, and my co-host for today is well-known comedian and host of The Space Cave, a good friend of mine. So, Warg, David, how are you doing today?
Good. A big warg to you as well. That's going to sound so strange to people
I know.
listening.
It's fine. How are you staying safe and preoccupied?
Yeah, it's been challenging for everybody. I think everyone has moments where they go, whew, this is a lot. And then you hear a story or you look and see that someone else inevitably has it much more difficult, much more challenging. So I know people that are going through physical ailments, whether that's cancer or just needing to get in to have a surgery or just get a checkup, get treatment. And that's been really tough. We're expecting a child. So it's been.
First of all, congrats.
Oh, thanks. It's yeah, we're excited. It's for us, it's we can't have people over. So people have gone the whole time and been like, oh, I just realized I haven't seen the baby bump. I haven't seen what it looks like, let alone rubbed it and those are minor things compared to people being evicted from losing their jobs and a variety of other horrific results that have come of it. So I think it's a weird existential period for everybody because you have to realize and find what you can focus on that makes you feel better without feeling kind of neglectful of what's really happening. So being involved, trying to help where you can, and then also occupying yourself, because if you just watch the news nonstop, you'll go insane. Or at least that's what I found. So I've kept myself pretty busy with like physical projects using my hands, and that has been helpful.
Well, what do you like normally do in terms of like project wise?
I mean, I I have too many hobbies. I work on bikes. I make stuff out of wood. And that's what I've mostly been doing during this. Is a lot of reorganizing and building shelves and cabinets and tables and things like that. And I found a bunch of stuff. I think people did some quarantine cleaning in my neighborhood and surrounding ones. Their method for getting rid of it was just to throw their old stuff out. A lot of it was really nice and just had like a broken leg or minor things that needed to be fixed. So I fix up a lot of stuff. How about you?
Well, I mean, kind of in the same vein, but a little different. So I refurbish appliances.
Oh,
So
cool.
gas dryers mainly, but sometimes washers, sometimes refrigerators. Same thing with furniture. We find it people throwing it out, and then we just pick it up, refurbish it, fix whatever is broken, and then sell it. But yeah, it's kind of like that. I just have a lot of projects that I'm tackling. I'm also sewing too, and knitting, and doing this podcast. I feel like It's definitely a time of self-reflection, and the world has kind of been in this fast-paced sort of lifestyle of go here, go there, have to be with this person, have to be with that person, that we weren't necessarily reflecting on what other things we've been wanting to explore as people. And I feel like this, along with other circumstances, have really helped people to, like you said, clean out things that they probably wouldn't have been able to, or explore different ventures that they probably haven't thought of exploring or have been. And that's basically how I started this podcast, even though it's also definitely a passion project. But I study and I work as a educator, and yeah, it's basically, if I'm not studying, I'm working on a lesson plan. And so it's definitely a nice change of pace. The fact that I can at least teach students, I feel like I'm fulfilling my job. It might not be as many as it normally is, but a lot of teachers tend to see it as, oh, why aren't my students coming to class? But I see it as, I'm able to teach kids, and as long as I can do that, I've done my job.
Cool.
So, what made you primarily inspire you to start this space cave?
I liked podcasting. I knew Professor Blastoff was ending, and I knew that if I didn't get something going right away, I would just sit there and think about it and overthink it and never get a new thing started. So I just kind of put a boat in the water, so to speak, without it maybe being fully. I think it was well thought out. I knew what I liked about the conversations we had on Professor Blastoff. I loved all the improv and silliness, but some of my more memorable ones were when we really learned something. And I liked the familiarity of, maybe just a little bit more one-on-one. So, and I did Mark Maron's show. I was a guest, and I remember when I left thinking, like, that was really fun because it was just two people. It's nice when you have a whole group and everyone's tossing around ideas and funny things, but just one-on-one, I really felt like that would be something worth checking out. So I went about it that way.
So space, science, all that stuff, that's what you primarily talk about on the Space Cave. And you have some very reputable people on your podcast, PhDs and whatnot. So today's episode is called A Place Called Space. So the episode starts with Vivian showing off her space mobile.
Yeah, it's weird. I thought it would be a mobile but it's not a vehicle. I feel like they called it a mobile, right, or mobile.
But it's just like a mobile.
It's like a hangar. So I didn't understand where that term came from.
I think it just comes from the term of like those. Yeah, it's like those decorations that people hang sometimes for their babies over their cribs.
That's what it reminded me of. Yeah, the thing that sometimes it'll have like a little lullaby and it kind of spins around slowly with things hanging from it. Yeah. They kind of made one of those just hanging off of a clothes hanger, which is cool. But yeah, and you can see the imagination where like I took some streamers and blah blah blah, and this is a comet. You're like, well, that's nothing like a comet, but that's through the eyes of an adult. You're like, yeah. For a kid watching, I felt kind of sad in a way that I only got to see it for the first time as an adult, because you're no matter how in touch with your inner child or that imaginative voice, you're seeing it and like, oh come on, that's not a comet. What are you doing?
But so yeah, she shows off her mobile, and talks about the sun and the moon, and then she shows off Earth, and she said it's called the Earth because, well, some people might not know that it's called the Earth. As a little kid, you know about the sun, you know about the moon, but something, our Earth having its proper name, it's a little more complicated to remember in your brain. I like what she does because she has such an interesting voice where she gets a kid's attention, and the way she's like, if you look really closely, you can see our clubhouse, and I can see Tony and Jill and Alicia and Nicholas coming, and so she obviously can't see them, but she's pretending to, and
Mm-hmm.
and then they surprise her because they're like, they're, I guess they came in while she wasn't looking, and they're like hearing her talk to herself. I swear I just heard them, but I was just pretending like I could see them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, uh, it's interesting how she invites the viewer to pretend, but then when it kind of gets silly for her, she has to like rationalize. Okay, I was just pretending, but I swear I could just hear them. I mean, she is the adult in the situation, but I don't know. It just kind of was like weird that she didn't play along with the. She was trying to rationalize it as an adult. Everyone's in the clubhouse, and they see Vivian's mobile,
Mm-hmm.
and they're asking about it, and they're pointing to things that they see. Alicia, she's pointing out a comment. And I remember being that age of like 7, 8 years old and knowing big words and be like, look, that's a comment. I know that word. I'm brainy. I'm very smart. So good on her for knowing, for having a big vocabulary, because she also uses words like loft and stuff
Uh-huh.
like that.
Yeah,
And
you're right. I didn't even think of that from that age group. That some of those words were a little bit ahead of their schedule.
mm-hmm. And Jill asks how fast they go. So Nicholas runs over and grabs some streamers, and then he shows her by like swinging his arm in like a figure eight. And you know how kids are. They see something that they think is fun, so then they copy what they see. So then Jill and Alicia are go and grab streamers too, and then you know are pretending to have a comet in their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jill asks if planets zoom too, which is, it's, I feel like the way that the kids act is very, it's very spot on to how kids used to be, where they'd always ask questions. I mean, kids still are like that, but I feel like there's a little more sophistication to them now because they grew up with technology and they have more ready access to information and such things. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel that that inquisitiveness that they have, it's kind of like not there anymore because they can just Google whatever question they have, versus I feel like kids a few years ago would always be asking questions like, oh well, why does ice melt, or why does the sun set and then the moon rise, and why isn't it as bright as the sun? And but yeah, I feel like it's something that's kind of like slowly disappearing. Like kids aren't doing that as much anymore.
I remember when I was substitute teaching and around kids of probably like the age that you work with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we all just have a different version of how childhood actually was. I remember being told like, okay, you guys have 10 minutes of free time. You can draw or color or something like that. That it was a frenzy of people, getting all their materials and making something happen. And every time I was subbing, I would mention that. Like, okay, thinking I was giving them like a real treat. You get 10 minutes. And the kids were like, to do what? It was like, you can write. They would just go, can we talk? And I'd be like, no, do anything. You've been talking all class already. Like, this is time for you to be creative. You can draw whatever you want. You can color. You can write a story. You can't talk. And they really struggled with that. And I was like, maybe those same kids are going to grow up and be like, kids were way more creative when I was younger. And maybe we're just catching them at a weird time, or it wasn't as we remember it, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it is genuinely, like you're saying, that kids are getting a little more boring and they're just glued to their screens and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot more social sophistication, I feel, with kids now versus back then, where they'd always ask questions like, "Oh, well, why do we have to dress so fancy when we go to dinner? Why do I have to clean my room when we have guests over and all that, all that stuff." But yeah, so Jill's asking like, do they zoom? And so it's a good question. Like, do planets zoom? And but they don't. Tony explains that planets don't zoom, but they just spin.
It's music time.
The first song is called "In Outer Space," and it's very like pop, but I feel like it's
It
kind
is,
of,
yeah.
it's very like 80s, late early 90s type of pop. It was very catchy, talking about riding inside a rocket to the Milky Way, and all this stuff that they do in space. But yeah, I feel like it's definitely, it could have been a hit single. That's how I feel.
Again, I just kept thinking of how many rehearsals they had to do because it's so choreographed. I just kept thinking of the kids being like, "Did we get it? No, no, no lunch. Go back to your spot."
I feel like there are some episodes where that happens, where they have like these really abrupt cuts, like camera cuts, where it's like they I feel like they only had a limited amount of time and a limited amount of takes that they just. Yeah, I totally get that. Where sometimes the choreography is a little more complicated, and you can tell that they probably didn't do it in one take, and so it was fun. It looked like they were having fun. I mean, some of them were kind of laughing while they were singing it. But yeah, it did a good job of explaining kind of like some concepts of like how in space there's no up or down, and how planets just like endlessly spin, and it's I felt like it's really good. It was just really good. So after the kids focus their attention back onto Vivian's mobile and start naming planets after themselves, which I remember doing, where it's like point to something and say, "Oh, that's mine," or "Oh, I'm gonna name this after myself." It's such a
Yeah.
kid thing to do. I remember going on road trips and just like to pass the time, we would point out to cars and be like, "Oh, that's my car." Or we'd point to some ugly car and be like, "Oh, that's your car."
Yeah, we would
Just
do the exact same thing. And I remember us being me and my sister, my cousin, in a station wagon where, we could all, it feels like we were just all sitting on our knees with our chins rested on the tailgate of the station wagon, just going, cars that went in the other direction, cars that zoomed up and passed us, exactly what you just said. That's my car. Dang it. I didn't see it. Well, you were looking away and that's my car now. Dang it.
mm-hmm.
We'd get into a fight. I said it first. No, you didn't. And I mean, being a parent, the idea of having to settle that debate. What's going on here? Well, this blue car passed us, and so said it was theirs. I called it out first. It's mine. Like, yeah, neither of you own the car. You're 6. Of course. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's definitely a kid thing to do, to just name things after yourself, or just like claim possession of something that you know it's not yours. So yeah, they're just like looking at her mobile and be like, "Oh, this is Planet Nicholas, and this is Planet Jill," and so not to exclude Alicia, Tony asks like, "Oh, where's Planet Alicia?" And it's like this tiny little pom pom at the very top of the mobile that you can't really see. So then they all ask if they can each make a space mobile.
It's arts and crafts time.
And so they make space mobiles, and I felt like the craft was a little advanced.
If I had a critique of this episode, the craft was a little advanced.
I do. I honestly do. It can be a little complicated because it's like, how are you stringing the pot scrubbers or pom poms or pipe cleaners onto the yarn? So that's why I was just kind of like, it's a little, in my mind, I was just like, it's a little advanced. Because, yeah, I'm artsy fartsy, I sew, I knit, I do all that stuff. So it's like, my brain, I was like, this might be a little too complicated for like a preschooler to do on their own.
Yeah. I felt like, though, if you are a preschooler watching those kids, like, they're pretty sharp and with it, that you want to aspire to be that. So I'd prefer watching a show where they're a little bit more advanced as opposed to taking it down a notch or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, but I certainly couldn't look at it and understand like what age group it would be advanced for. I was just thinking like, well, this is kids. I think I'm too removed from it.
So they use like hangers and yarn and tape and pom-poms and pot scrubbers and pipe cleaner, then construction paper that they cut out moons and stars out of. And so what they basically do is they tape one end of the yarn to the hanger and then one to the to whatever they're sticking on there. And it works, but at the same time I felt like it could have been done like a little bit differently. I felt like they could have used plastic hangers, because wire hangers are just asking for like cuts and pokes through the skin and
Yeah.
it definitely requires a sharp eye from the parents to just keep their eyes on the kid. They can't like look down for a second, or else their kid's just gonna like poke their eye out. Because kids are very, oh well, what'll happen if I put this in my mouth, like the hanger tip or something like that. But yeah, so like they could have done like a loop, like a loop knot, is it called? And then like I don't know, tied the decoration onto, like they could have threaded it through and then like tied a knot on it. But yeah, I mean it's a pretty cool little project, something to spend like an hour on with your kids and stuff. Definitely a good project. There, definitely plenty of room to like change up the theme of the decorations and stuff. It's not necessarily space. It could be any sort of thing. So while they're finishing up their mobiles, Jill goes over to grab a toy cow to put on her mobile, and Nicholas remarks that there aren't any cows in space. So she's like, of course they are. So then she recites that nursery rhyme, "Hey diddle diddle." I honestly, I didn't even know what the nursery rhyme was called. I just knew it by the whole rhyme itself. But it's called, it's called "Hey diddle diddle."
I knew where they were going with that one. As soon as there was like, why is there a cow? I was like, oh, here we go.
So, but I think it's so cute because I feel like the way she explains it, it's like kids do still think like that, where it's like, so if the moon's in space, then there must be a cow in space. It's like that rationale of, well, if it only eats, if this monster only eats mice, it won't eat me. Like it's like they try and rationalize these things with that, like. But I thought it was cute, and that had them talking about how they reach space. So like, like riding a bicycle up to space, or taking a rocket to space, and then this inspires Vivian to suggest that they make a rocket and pretend to go into outer space. So they like split off in all sorts of directions, and they get cushions and headgear, and I feel like this is such a timeless thing of like kids just grabbing whatever in their house and pretending to go to outer space. It's such a timeless thing. You see it in movies all the time. You see it in TV shows where like they put on like colanders or strainers or pots or pans, and then they sit like on a cushion or whatever and pretend to go into space.
Yeah.
Personally, I've never had any interest in space. I've always saw it as like empty. I never really was like, oh wow, I want to be an astronaut. I never had those aspirations. I never did something like that. But no, I definitely know people who have done stuff like that. Were you like one of those people that like dressed up or did anything like that?
So on Instagram, my little avatar is a kid with a cardboard box around them and like a fishbowl on their head, kind of looking up, and they've made it into a spaceship. And I don't know that it was always that or some version of that, but I definitely, my sister and I was just joking about it the other day that I would like, anytime there were cardboard boxes or something, I would fashion some kind of a door, and I'd use a lot of couch pillows. I love to like rip everything off the couch and figure out a way to like get back underneath it. There was if it was a pull-out couch, if when you're a kid, you can kind of squish through the back and get in this really enclosed space in the back of it. And it was always, I don't know if that was space to me. It was just, there was a hideout element, like a fort that I loved.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the couch cushions and pillows and the boxes, it was always turning them into like a horse trailer being towed by a truck.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have my sister, I'd like lead her into the trailer part, like, whoa, now, whoa, get up in here. Whoa, there you go. Stand there like a horse, and I would drive us wherever we were going, and then park and swing out the couch cushion and come on out now. Whoa, there you go. And then we'd switch, and I'd be the horse, and I'm sure we'd fight a lot along the way. But that was, to talk about it was kind of funny, like, oh, that's cute. But I remember being a kid, and I was like, that was a truck and trailer. And so I always think that's important to keep in mind, that when those mobiles to us as adults look so dumb, and the spaceship and the way they're walking and stuff, but all you need to do is give them, I feel like, kind of a vessel to put their imagination into,
Mm-hmm.
and then it can be anything. And I think we discredit kids so much, thinking like, oh, they're just playing around, but really they're into it. They really believe it in a I suppose it's a healthy way. Maybe it's a form of being psychotic, but I think it's healthy.
Yeah. So they're pretending to like make sure the sky is clear and adjusting speed before, and they blast off into space, but not without putting on their seatbelts. And I felt like that was kind of like a little dumb. I know it's a kid's show, but it's like, I felt like that was always the thing where like, oh, make sure we look both ways. Oh, make sure we buckle up into our seatbelts. It was just like that contrived insertion. Versus if they just said, oh, make sure we put on our seatbelts. All right, let's check the sky. Let's check if they did it first before, like, if they didn't do it as soon as they were going to blast off, then I would have been, like, fine with it. But, like, they were about to blast off, and then Jill's like, oh, but we have to buckle our seatbelts. It just felt like such a contrivance.
I mean, I had a parent that wasn't wild about seatbelts when I was a kid. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one, coming out of an era where, like, we didn't need all that stuff. And you have people that don't want to wear helmets when they're riding motorcycles, and some states don't even require it. But I think if you're programming television and you want to encourage kids to wear their seatbelts, if you're just looking at statistics, you're like, I can't believe X amount of kids die per year from no seatbelt. I would imagine that had a hand in it. Like, we really want to make it look cool. The kids watching really look up to these kids. Let's make sure that they're not just putting on seatbelts, but they're doing it. They're like jamming the seatbelts in, effusively doing it.
I'm not saying that, the seatbelt thing was like, oh, they shouldn't have done it. I'm just saying, like, I just felt like it was such a mood killer for Jill to just say at the last second when they're about to blast off into space.
You're like, just go to space already!
I know.
I can't take this tension!
It just, I don't know. It just took me out of the immersion. So yeah, they're in space, and then they take off their seatbelts, and then they just imagine floating through space.
It's music time!
So, the song is We're Gonna Go Spacewalking. And it's very reggae, which is so genius in the sense of it's very appropriate for the idea of space, because most of the time people think space and they think techno, or they think of like synth and pop, but like reggae, you get like this like lax feeling, and I don't know, for me I just felt it was kind of like a refreshing change of pace, because it's like spacewalking, it's like very slow and going with the flow, and that's exactly what reggae is. I just wish it was longer, in all honesty. That, they had a 2-minute song at the beginning. There's no way they're gonna have another 2-minute song in the episode. But so yeah, I just wish it was just a little bit longer. I felt the reggae was definitely refreshing. So after walking in space, they head back to Earth, and then Nick Lets it be known that they didn't even go to see the sun. They got sunglasses to go visit the sun, and they didn't get to go see the sun. But Jill's like, well, it's like very far away, and it'd take forever to get there. So Alicia asks Tony why it's so far away, which reminds him of like we were talking about of a Nigerian. It's a Nigerian folktale.
Right.
It's story time.
So the folktale in translation is called "Why the Sun and the Moon Live in the Sky." That's literally what the story is called. It's very wordy. I felt like it was interesting in that it introduces kids to another culture.
Yeah.
It was just a little too out of left field. But then again, there aren't that many stories about going to space. And it's interesting, like I said, but it's a little confusing, I'd say.
It is because they don't preface it by being like, this is what a folk tale is. This is a kind of a made up thing that we don't put any credence in. But when they say like, this story comes from Nigeria and we're going to tell it to you now, there's not enough of an emphasis on like, this is wrong. This is in no way how space was formed. This is not why the sun and the moon are where they are.
I feel though that I feel like they excel better in abstract concepts versus things that are more science based. I get that space can be a little more abstract, but I feel like we just don't know much about space other than planets, stars, and suns, and it doesn't have as much wiggle room as something like tubes and boxes and plants and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as I like the story, it was just didn't tie into the episode.
Yeah.
So they finish the story and Tony takes the kids home with Vivian taking the chance to give the viewers the idea of building their own spaceships and imagining floating in space and just imagining all the planets they might see. And that was a place called space. So before we get to our verdict, let's just, open thoughts on the actors. So.
Yeah, I think I kind of covered that at the beginning to a certain degree in that I agree with you that Tony was a little more laid back and mellow. And, it's weird to see, like, a black guy with dreads who looks cool, but being on this kids show that is anything but cool. They're like, you could tell maybe they wanted to hire him for, and to credit the show, like, it's way ahead of its time. It's so diverse. You have an Asian woman and then a black guy, and then the kids have some diversity. So that was really nice to see that it wasn't just a cavalcade of white people. But I was so curious at Tony, like, what's his life outside of this life? Who are his friends? Who's he hang out with? He's kind of an anomaly, and that, like, if he's a musician or something like that, which he, when he brought out the drum, you're like, oh, okay, maybe he's like a pretty skilled musician, but he just kind of tapped on it. Or you're like, I think I could have done that. I don't even know if this guy has any musical training. So who is he? Why? He looks interesting. He looks like he could be like an adjunct professor that all the kids want to hang out with on a college campus somewhere. He looks like he could be in a cool band. He looks like a variety of people, and yet he's on this kids show being like nodding his head and smiling. So I was intrigued by Tony. I'm so curious where he is now. And then Vivian, she just seems sweet. I'll bet she's still involved in something that deals with helping people, whether she made it. Who knows how much money they made doing that, if she's just happily retired, or what if she went on to like have a career in a soap opera as an actor after that, or seems unlikely. I would guess she finished the show, maybe did or did not like Hollywood, maybe is into nursing now or something like that. I could see her being a helper or like volunteering after school. And then the kids, they didn't strike me as the type that were going to be like typical Disney kids and get into drugs and dress real provocatively and all that. So I like these kids' chances to go ahead. I thought they all had unique things about them, and they all have a similarity in that, like, seemed pretty savvy. They seemed like they knew what was going on. Like, we're gonna have you sing and dance and act like you're excited and play along even when you know something. That's hard to have a kid do. Like, you come into this scene and you know what that is. You know that that is a can of beans, but you have to go, whoa, what's that? Like, you really mean it, you know. And some kids I think
Yeah.
would come in and be like, hey, what's that? Like, no, come on, you got to pretend. Like, I can't pretend. I know it's beans. But they did a really good job, I think, of selling it. They really sold. They didn't know what stuff was, so I hope they're
Yeah.
doing well now.
Well, I mean, Tony, what's funny is that you mentioned Mr. Rogers earlier. There was a segment where Tony was featured in an episode of Mr. Rogers where Mr. Rogers went to just, I think it was to behind the scenes of Stomp, the musical,
Mm-hmm.
because Tony was part of the original production of Stomp
Cool.
in '95, so he's definitely got a very musically
Yeah,
heavy.
there it is. So he is a music guy and a cool guy. I had Ahmed Best on my show, who was also in Stomp, and very fascinating. Not only do you have to be so talented and musically, I think they dance a lot in Stomp. You know,
Mm-hmm.
mostly it's percussion stuff, but like you move around. It's such a talented show. But then beyond that, just a fascinating guy to talk to, and that level of cool, I wasn't picking up from Tony. You know, that's such a weird move for him. But I kind of like when people are really talented like that in a way that they're still not too cool to do a kid's show. It means like he didn't have an agent or manager saying, this is bad for your brand. He was like, I want to help kids. I want to be on a show like that. So it makes me like Tony more.
Yeah, Vivian. She is a theater director. I think. I believe she still does theater directing. She moved over to California, so she does theater directing, and she used to teach. Like, she used to do classes at universities. But she's a mom now, and she, she had her daughter like do, modeling and acting and commercials and stuff. So I mean, like, I guess she still likes the whole performing aspect, and but if yeah, I don't think like she really cared for the big stuff like the money and the fame and all that. I think she did it because she genuinely saw it as a great opportunity to represent, be a woman, a Filipino woman, and hosting a show. And showing diversity and all that stuff. I feel like they both saw it as a great opportunity to show, be hosts as part of like a Disney project, because Disney was definitely a big name even back then in the '90s.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the kids. I feel like the way that they read the scripts, it's like they talk like kids versus Barney, where it's like it's the way that those kids on that show acted. It was just so. Even as a kid, I was like, these kids are lame. The Barney kids, they were like lame, but when I saw it at the box, like, I want to be friends with that person and that person. It was like you could see the difference, but yeah, the show is definitely something that would I'd say with a little bit of updates, it could definitely be a comeback because it's definitely a DIY thing.
Mm-hmm.
And DIY has definitely become a big trend these days. So let's go ahead and get to the verdict then. So let's start with the theme. So the theme of space, in my opinion, the episode theme of space, I feel it still would hold up, but like to little kids, not to like anyone past the age of 7.
I agree. Yeah, and I don't. And if I had a little child, which I guess in a few years I will, I don't think I would show them this episode unless they had run out of everything. But in theory, there's going to be so much more made that even maybe showing kids Mister Rogers or anything else, they go, this isn't for me. I'm into Paw Patrol. I'm into this. It's always advancing and evolving, and which is a good thing. I think every generation show grows up with its own set of things.
So the music then. The music, I feel it still holds up. It's very catchy. I feel that it's definitely very involved in terms of like, you don't just sit down and listen. You can get involved and like, spinning around like a planet or pretending to walk in space. In my opinion, I feel that the music of this episode still holds up.
Yeah, I like the songs. I think they definitely hold up. I like that.
Yeah, out of the two, definitely In Outer Space is the more memorable of the two. Could have been a hit single. They didn't take advantage of it. They had Disney record. They could have, printed out Disney single. But so the arts and crafts, I feel that the arts and crafts can definitely holds up. It just needs a few little modifications, like no wire hangers, just plastic hangers, and just I feel like it's definitely a nice activity to do one afternoon, and then you can hang them up by their bedroom windows, their mobiles.
Yeah.
So for me, it holds up.
Sure. Yeah, I think looking at that, you're like, ooh, that's a good idea.
And the story, if I'm just judging it by itself, I feel that the story, I feel that it doesn't hold up because it's confusing, and it just doesn't necessarily tie into every other aspect of the episode, even though it has the sun, the sun and the moon, but it's very different from everything else. So I feel like it doesn't hold up.
It's such a stupid story because the whole impetus is to be closer to the moon or the water. I think the moon.
Well, the sun wanted the sun wanted the water to come over, but the water was like, "Oh, but your house is not big enough." So he builds a bigger house, and then floods it, and so they escape to space, and so that's why the sun and the moon live in space now.
But that story's really about you had water relatively close to you, and because you built this big ass house, now you have to be millions of miles away just looking at it. You can never hang out with it again.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more of a moral to that story, I feel like, about being careful that you don't get what you wish for, or things like that. Or if you do, it could be going after the things that you want could lead to severe consequences. That seemed like what it was more about to me. So none of that story made any sense. I didn't really think it was beneficial, but that's just me.
And lastly, the overall performance in this episode. I feel that the overall performance was I feel it holds up because it's very natural. Like, they have a conversation during their arts and crafts, and they question they question what they do, like how Nicholas is questioning, like, oh, well, cows that aren't in space, and it's like the way that they progress the show is very organic. Is how it was performed. It felt very like I forget that there's a script to this show sometimes.
To me, it felt very scripted. So I again, anytime kids are acting and having kind of that like arms crossed, head nod, hi, I'm so. I instantly am kind of like cringy.
But overall, a place called space still holds up. So before we go, David, are there any last minute thoughts or anything like that you would like to share?
I don't think so. Stay safe out there. Wear a mask. Try to wash your hands.
Don't invite water over to your house if it's not big enough.
No. Yeah. I feel like there's a correlation. People that like that story and who now get really into QAnon or something like that. So listen to the scientists. Make sure you're skeptical about things you read and go search out if you don't want to believe in it. And then if it's peer reviewed and it checks out, you might have to take science's word for it as opposed to your own feelings. And I wish the episode maybe had been a little bit more about that. But wear a mask. Be safe.
Yeah. So make sure to leave a comment if you like what you hear. Why not subscribe to my YouTube channel? I'm also on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts as the Box Cutter Podcast. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me what I can improve on. at theboxcutter@gmail.com because it takes a village to raise something beautiful, in the words of Tony and Vivian. So long. Farewell until we meet again.
Travel through the galaxy in half a day. Orbit round the moon, it's my favorite place. We're flying through the sky in outer space. Let's ride inside a rocket through the Milky Way. Travel through the galaxy in half a day. Orbit round the moon, it's my favorite